Welcome to another 21 Hats Dashboard. I'm Lauren Feldman, and I'm here with Gene Marks. Hello, Gene.
Hello, Lauren. How are you?
I'm doing great. Great to have you back here. You good?
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be back, actually. And thank you for accommodating my travel schedule. It's appreciated.
Of course. Gene, as you may have heard, there was some big news on Friday when the Supreme Court declared President Trump's reciprocal tariffs unconstitutional. What's your basic reaction to that?
Well, the first reaction I have is that the Supreme Court was absolutely right. They are unconstitutional. And all the Supreme Court was doing was basically reaffirming what two lower courts have found, that the president completely exceeded his authority by, implementing these tariffs. So I've always felt, Lauren, that presidents should act within the law. Do you know what I mean?
And what a concept!
What a concept! And it's not just Trump. I mean, a lot of his predecessors also, tried to lead by executive order, and and then the courts would put a stop to that. And thank God. I'm glad we have a court system, and I'm glad all of our presidents are abiding by the court system. But they are, Trump is going to. This is not going to end. So this is the one thing that is certain. And I've been talking about this for months, Lauren, to groups, as I go around and speak. Everybody wants to hear about tariffs. My big message is I expected this to happen. And yet the one thing that's certain will be uncertainty for businesses. This is far from over.
What do you think happens now?
So, well, Trump has got, first of all, just going back, last June, Carolyn Levitt, his press secretary, said that the administration can walk and chew gum at the same time when it came to all of the tariff stuff going on. And Scott Bessent, his Treasury Secretary, said back in December that the tariff, if the Supreme Court overrules him or finds him exceeding his authority, that won't affect the Trump administration. I am quoting from CNBC. He said the Trump administration will be able to replicate tariffs even if it loses the Supreme Court decision. And again, that was last December that he said that. So the administration has a lot of tricks up its sleeve that they can play. So, for example, there's three big ones. There's the Smoot-Hawley Act of 1930, which, and again, maybe we can, if you want to discuss the pros and cons of each.
Yeah, well, we could go through them quickly, but it's interesting. You mentioned the Smoot-Hawley Act, and of course, You're right. We all learned about it because it was considered a disaster.
Yeah.
Tell us how that might come into play now.
Yeah, it was a disaster when it was last implemented, but it is actual law. So I like that because it is. It allows the U.S. to impose up to 50% tariffs on imports from countries that discriminate against U.S. goods. So that is all the stuff that the president would need. It requires an investigation. There is a time limit, but again, it does leave the entire decision up to the president. But the problem
it requires congressional approval.
Yes,
too, doesn't it?
Yes, that's exactly what I was getting at. Yeah, the issue is that a president just can't just do this on their own, like Trump has been behaving. He would need congressional approval to enact the Smoot-Hawley Act. And as we all know, even though he has a slim majority in both the House and the Senate, there is a not insignificant number of Republicans, people in his own party, that are not thrilled with tariffs. And that, and I think he knows that. Like going down this road to get congressional approval would most likely end up in failure. And by the way, the way the midterms are looking, it's likely, I think he's going to, lose, at least the House, if not the Senate, in the midterms. And if this happens, then forget about ever enacting the Smoot-Hawley Act. So I think it's an option for him if he wants to go down that road. I wish he would, because it's law, and like that would be, if Congress approves it, then I'm all, supportive of that. That's, that's why we elected our officials.
Wait, you would be in favor of the tariffs if they're done legally?
No, I'm saying I would be in favor of, I'm not saying I'm in favor of tariffs per se. That's another argument to have or another debate to have. But I would be in favor of that methodology of moving forward with tariffs. If he
doing it legally.
Yes, doing it through Congress. Yes, doing it legally.
So the Smoot-Hawley is one option, but as you well know, he's already said he's going to choose a different option,
Yes,
and
there's
that's, I
two
believe,
others.
Section 122.
Yes, there's Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, and there was Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. One of those acts, the first one, the 1974 one, gives him the ability to impose up to a 15% tariff on countries as he chooses. That's exactly what he did last week. As soon as
Or he said he's going to do. I don't know that the action has actually been put into place. Do you know?
True, but it looks pretty likely that that is going to happen. He's going to raise the global tariff that he has already in effect from 10% to 15%. However, there is a 150-day limit to this tariff. So unless Congress again approves an extension, which is as I mentioned before, is far from assured.
150 days would put us right before those midterms you were talking
Yes, it
about.
would.
It would be a very difficult vote to ask his party members to take.
It would, but and yet at the same time, again, I mean, listen, I actually support a democratic system of government. So if it puts it in front of the midterms and the Democrats make this a main issue of their platform, which I would expect they would, and then let the voters decide. I don't know. I mean, I've always said to people that were upset when Trump got elected to say, you got midterms coming up in 2 years. You'll have your chance to turn things around, and that's a perfect example of one of the things that can happen. So yeah, he's limited to 150 days, but he's he might still play that card, and businesses are going to have to deal with this over the next 150 days. Then there's the Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. So this is a third choice, right? The first was Smoot-Hawley. The second was the 1974 150-day limitation. This one, the 1962 Trade Expansion Act, does allow him to impose tariffs on selected sectors and industries. This is exactly what the Biden administration did in 2024. They imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum and semiconductors and electric vehicles and critical minerals. They were all pointed towards China, of course, but it wasn't, and that's how the PR was. But it was really, he was using that act to do that, which gave him the ability to do it. Those tariffs can go on for as long as the president wants. However, investigations are required along with public comment. So I can see the Trump administration getting him, to all sorts of tricks with their investigations and quote unquote public comment, and then just implementing tariffs on key product sectors, industries that obviously are connected to certain countries. And that gives him a lot of flexibility to do what he's got to do. He'll get sued. And, people say they didn't do enough investigation or they didn't take enough public comment or whatever. And then as we know from this president, he will sue back and they'll fight it out in the courts and it'll get extended. And who knows when that will ever be.
And the uncertainty will continue.
Correct. And that gets back to what we said at the beginning of this conversation. If you're a business and you're affected by the tariffs, don't think for a second that I'm all good to go because of the Supreme Court ruling. He's got tricks up his sleeve and the uncertainty is going to continue.
I think with the 232 thing, the couple of things that are worth pointing out there is, one, you can't do it globally. You have to go country by country.
Yes.
And also you have to have specific complaints about those countries. And I think the categories that I saw were national security or unfair trade practices.
Yeah.
You have to be able to establish a case on those grounds.
Yeah, and the Trump administration will make those cases. And then again, people, there certainly will be people, particularly in the industries affected, that will oppose. And then what you think he's going to roll over?
Right.
They'll go to court and they'll fight and appeal and blah, blah, blah.
All right. So another big area of uncertainty, and one that a lot of small businesses are really concerned about, is what are the prospects of getting a refund of the money that was taken unconstitutionally? What do you think, Gene?
Forget about it. I mean, particularly for a small business, and let me tell you, for starters, The refund, I'm going to give you a few things that you need to, we all need to understand. The refunds actually come from the importer exporter of record. Like, if you're bringing products into this country, you're dealing with a brokerage firm or an import export firm, and they're the ones that are of record. They receive the goods in. They're the ones that pay the tariffs, and then they turn back to their customers to pay them.
Well, wait a second. If somebody is importing goods from China or wherever, a retailer, they're laying out money for those tariffs.
It goes through a middleman, okay, because that's how it works. And so the middleman is the one that's actually the one of record, the importer export of record. That's how the tariffs are recorded. And then the middleman, as part of their brokerage agreement with the companies that they're representing, then get reimbursed from those companies for these tariffs. You follow?
Got it.
So it would have to be the middleman. And by the way, it would have to be the middleman that would have to go and get that money back. Like, the company can't do it. It's because they're not the one of record. So now you're asking some of these brokerage firms, many of them are smaller and whatever, you got to rely on them to go through this process. And I'm not saying that they're not able to, but they're just not structured to do this or have the resource to do it. There isn't even a process in place for them to follow. So you're really kind of going to have to lean pretty heavily on these companies to do that. And that's one thing. Okay. The second part of it is that even the Supreme Court, like Justice Kavanaugh in his dissent, said this was going to be a mess. The Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said, "Hey, we're not coming up with a process. That's for the lower court to decide, because that's where it all started." So the administration basically is just wiping their hands at this and turning it back to the lower court to figure it out. God knows if they're even able to do this. Nothing has been thought through. So that will be the issue. And then we have read that there are some lawyers of the larger corporations have been filing claims to get refunds and instituting lawsuits. I mean, they're going to be the ones with their hands out first before any crumbs get dripped down to smaller businesses. You know what I mean? And that's going to take a while, if it even happens at all. So I'm not saying it couldn't happen, Lauren, but it just seems like it's going to be a long, hard hill to climb for a small business to get that money back. That's my opinion.
Does it seem a little callous for the administration just to wipe its hands? I mean, it's been determined that they took the money illegally from a lot of small businesses. Everybody's in favor of small businesses. Why not take some initiative to try to make them whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does sound callous, but at the same time, I think that their position is, regardless of what the Supreme Court did, we're going to do other things to collect tariffs. So it's.
But that's going forward. Whatever they do going forward, they've all.
But will they make the case? I'm putting words into their mouth.
Sure,
you have to ask them. But would they make the case of saying, well, these new tariffs, under the 1974 Act or the 62 Act, whatever, would just replace the tariffs that have already been charged in the past. So it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. So no, you're not going to get any money back because of that. You know what I mean? Yep. I mean, right now, the tariff situation is such that for most countries, even EC, now India, Mexico, Canada, the tariffs are in that 10 to 15% range. China, it's higher. It's like 30%, So, there is that sort of case that they could make saying like, well, it's in that range anyway. And these tariffs are under the 74 Act that we're using right now. So therefore you can't come back and get them back. I don't know, Lauren. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of arguments that they've got and, they're going to be making them. So, it is, it's their position.
We should probably point out that these reciprocal tariffs that have been declared illegal are not the only tariffs that he's used. Nope. He's also put tariffs on aluminum and steel, manufacturing inputs that are not affected by this in any way. So the domestic manufacturers that have been paying the tariffs for that, they have no prospect whatsoever of a refund, and their situation continues as it was before the ruling.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, and he continued on from the Biden administration. They were the ones that implemented a lot of those tariffs, and Trump has extended some of those or increased them as well. So yeah, you're absolutely right. That's why it is. And again, getting back to the callous question though, because it's rough. We talked about this before, and I've talked about the map that I show when I speak about how all these states in America have more GDP than many countries out there, and all of that, and I think if you would ask the Trump administration, and please, for God's sake, not Trump himself, but if you would ask the Trump administration, their position is, this may seem callous, but in the long term, it's the best thing for small businesses, because we're going to bring more manufacturing back to the U.S. and more investments and more alternative suppliers that American companies can be using. I'm not saying I agree or disagree, Lauren. I think that's how they would probably respond to that.
Well, I'm sure you're right. The irony
I
in that,
I didn't say I don't know if I'm right about that either.
well, you're right that's what they would say.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think though just recently there's been data that's come out that shows that the trade deficit has expanded, not been reduced in the past year, which means that the tariffs haven't worked the way
not yet.
They were supposed to.
Yeah, not yet.
And with a lot of uncertainty now.
Yeah, that would be their argument, is that the tariffs really didn't kick in until the second half of the year. So it's not enough time. And, and then of course, not only that, but, you fail to mention, I mean, I'm sure you have, in the past that, there have been other studies that are showing that, this is being borne by the U.S. consumer and small businesses, these price increases, So this
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's come out. That's been reinforced in data that's come out, studies that have come out recently, that I think the figure was like 90% of it has been paid by small businesses and consumers.
And the administration will come back and say, okay, that's short term, and we believe this is what's best for America long term.
Actually, they said it was a lie. They said it was a faulty study.
That comes as no surprise either. But the takeaway is that they are they're doing this because they feel it's what's right for America for the long term. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that is
right.
That's their position.
One other thing about refunds I wanted to ask you, as I know I don't know how closely you've looked at this, there are outfits that have been selling kind of a form of insurance. If, even before the decision came down, if you wanted to pay them, they would pay you a certain amount of money to buy your quote unquote refund receivables if they ever come. Obviously it was not $1 for $1 worth of refunds, but some businesses did that. I think mostly larger businesses. Is that something that you've looked at? Do you know if that's something that should be considered at this point?
I got to tell you, it's a really good issue. And now, you get my wheels cranking, because it's sort of a form of insurance, you just said. So then I'm starting to think, is there tariff insurance out there for small businesses? I mean, I don't know the answer to this, and that's something I'm making a note of right now, Lauren. And I thank you. I am going to look into that.
Oh, I hope you do.
I think insurance companies would be mentally ill to get into this.
Well, one company that I know has done this is Cantor Fitzgerald. Have you seen that? It's the company that's run by Howard Lutnick, the Treasury Secretary. His sons are now in charge of it.
Right. Yeah. Lutnick is the Commerce Secretary.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yep.
Bissent is this treasurer. I know they're selling it. I think there are others.
I'm going to, I'm gonna look into it. I like this a lot. I mean, it's an interesting. I'm more interested. I mean, I'm looking as you and I are speaking. I'm actually Googling this because it is a big company kind of thing. You're right that they're representing, and I write about small businesses. But then it gets back to do small companies have options here? Lauren, you have my promise as part of this conversation. And for all the millions of people that are listening to us right now, you have my promise as well that I'm going to investigate this and see if there are options for small businesses to get some form of tariff insurance. The only I've been giving so many different options for businesses over the past year. We've talked about bonded warehouses and free trade zones and Make Onshoring Great Again portal and World Trade Center and all that. This is another interesting thought, and I'm going to look into it. I like it.
So, any thought? I mean, the last time you were on, I think you were saying that you felt as if the tariff issue had kind of calmed down a little bit, in part because it kind of seemed to be set. Other than the fact that this decision was looming, the tariffs weren't going up and down every other day the way they did for a little while. Businesses could maybe think they could start to plan a little bit. That's all out the window now. How do you think? How do businesses look at this going forward? I mean, for some, it's a really significant expense that's there or not there.
Yeah, it really does obviously depend on the business. The there's two things. I mean, I think that from a media perspective, it's not going to calm down. I think you're going to continue to see all sorts of coverage about this. Because it's a great story and he's going back and forth and all that kind of stuff. Okay, but I just want to be clear. Like right now, as we stand, the tariff on the EC, even before this global increase to 15%, is 15%, and tariffs in Japan are 15%, and the tariffs on Mexico and Canada, they are 25%. But really, if you're not USMCA compliant, the trade agreement. So for the most part, most of those goods are skirting tariffs, and that's why Mexico has now become our world's largest trading partner. The tariff on India, another major trading partner of the US, is now down to 15%. China is at 30%, and I get that. But even as China is at 30%, many of the tariffs that you mentioned, there's industry specific tariffs on aluminum, semiconductors, all that kind of stuff. There are anywhere from 25 to 25%, and even higher. My point is that I don't think that in reality that's going to change that much. I think that Trump might invoke and move forward with, say, the 1962 Act for tariffs on sectors and industries, or like he's increased the tariff, or he's proposed to increase the tariff to 15%, for the global tariff. But that's not those rates that he's settling in on. They don't seem to be much different than what's already in place right now. So to answer your question, I do think there's going to be all sorts of news and all sorts of things going back and forth because it's a great story. But I think if you're running a business, that 15% tariff that seems to be like this across the board agreed on tariff with most countries, with the exception of China, that seems to be like where it's just going to be. So when it comes to certainty, I think that you can make your plans assuming a 15% tariff rate. I don't foresee that being significantly more or less, as all these battles are taking place in 2026.
I think that makes sense. Obviously, the 15% you're referring to that he is talking about imposing has a 150-day expiration date. He has plans to try to extend it beyond that. So if you plan on the 15%, you're probably safe. And if it goes away, you get lucky.
Yeah, and even though I wouldn't bet on it going away, because again, that 1962 Act, he can continue to do something like that 15% rate on certain sectors and industries, country specific, like you mentioned. And I think he'll play around with that. But a lot of the countries are they've negotiated this stuff already with the Trump administration.
The status of those deals is kind of up in the air, though, right?
It is. I agree, and but at the same time, I don't get the sense that there's a lot of that's going to the rates themselves are going to change a lot. Now that doesn't mean he's not going to bluster and yell and scream and threaten more and this and that. That's all that's going to happen. But I just think if you're running a business, I think it's a fairly safe bet to assume a 15% tariff over the next year or two. And like every business owner tells me, Lauren, when I speak to them, when I interview them, my clients, they're like, you know what? I don't like the tariffs, but I want to know what they are so I can run my business. Do you know what I mean? And I think that will be the case.
Well, Gene, we know one thing you're planning to work on, and that's to look at the option of selling your refund receivables. Anything else we should look for? Are there any other business stories out there?
You know what? I am going to write about. I think for this week for the Washington Times, I'm writing on a piece about just like local legislation, good and bad, that's happening around the country for businesses. So much of the federal government has stepped away, from a lot of regulations as it is, but a lot of states have picked that up. Some for the good for businesses, and some not so good for businesses. And I've been researching to do sort of a recap of that. So that's what I'm working on.
Sounds interesting. Something else that we might talk about in the future.
Yeah.
Gene Marks is a CPA who writes weekly on small business for The Guardian, The Hill, The Philadelphia Inquirer, The Washington Times, The Chicago Daily Herald, Forbes, and Entrepreneur. You can hear him on ABC Radio's Eye on the World with John Batchelor. Gene also hosts a podcast with Paychex Corporation. Gene, thanks for taking the time.
Lauren, I love talking with you. Thank you. We'll talk again soon.
Our pleasure. Take care, everybody. Have a good week.